What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic from Boston, where he's covering the Dodgers against the Red Sox. And we're here to talk trade deadline. So, Fabian, I appreciate your time on the road coming on and joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, man.
We weren't supposed to be doing this show, Fabian. We were supposed to have done all of our trade deadline shopping in the offseason. There wasn't going to be any need for starters, relievers, or bench bats. What the heck happened?
Yeah, there were jokes about them being sellers at the deadline because they had too much on their roster, which, I mean, they could still sell at the deadline, but we might get into that later. But yeah, I mean, obviously, we've seen this is not, especially right now, like this is not the roster that Dodgers kind of envisioned when you laid it out on paper. Blake Snell's only made 2 starts. Tyler Glass now missed a couple months in the middle of the season. Their bullpen is not anywhere near where they kind of thought it would be, just because Evan Phillips out for the season. Blake Treinen's been hurt. Bruce Gratterall, they kind of didn't expect to be back yet, but like all this sort of stuff. Tanner Scott hasn't quite been what they've expected. Now he's hurt. Kirby Yates hasn't been quite as good as they expected. So all this sort of stuff together is kind of obviously focused a little bit more what the Dodgers' clear needs are at the deadline.
Now, in my world, I'm interacting with fans who are riding the roller coaster of 2 losses in a row, 4 losses in a row, some sweeps in a row, that kind of stuff. And I know how fans feel about this roster and how concerned they are about the bullpen or how concerned they are about the bottom of the lineup. What's interesting to me is it seems like, and you're more connected with the sort of internal workings of the team, but listening even just to Dave Robertson, his press conferences, like it seems like that high level of frustration is not limited to fans on the outside. It seems like people inside, is it fair to say, are, I don't want to say equally as concerned, but greatly concerned about the state of the roster.
I'm not sure about concerned, but frustrated. I think for sure. Like, I mean, they just weren't playing great, and like, and it's just, it was just like a style of play that was not. Like, it wasn't even like they were like losing these high scoring games, going back and forth or whatever. Like, it was just a frustrating watch. Like a lot of big mental mistakes, like defensive miscues, not throwing strikes. It'd be one thing with like earlier in the season, obviously, and they've had issues over the course of the season when it came to like giving up slug and stuff like that. Like that stuff can be frustrating or whatever, but like those are things that either you can like explain away as like, oh, like some variance, or like you can tweak a thing or two and like you fix that. But just not throwing strikes or throw balls to the outfield wall and stuff like that. That's the stuff that like is frustrating to watch. I think that's where that frustration really kind of broke through a little bit in that Brewers series. Like it wasn't just that they were like losing; it was the way that they were losing. And I don't know if it necessarily changed the way they thought about this deadline. Like they were probably going to be in a position to try to add a reliever regardless, even going into it. They probably were going to be in a position where, like, if there was an opportunity to upgrade with the bat, like they probably would do that regardless. But yeah, I think that frustration is more just how they were playing as opposed to like how the roster was constructed.
Okay. Well, let's talk through the different position groups, and we'll start with kind of the good news, which is starting pitching. There's a chance, Fabian. No Dodger fan is allowed to look too far ahead, but there's a chance that by the end of this week, the rotation, as they had basically dreamed it up, might exist with all of their top guys healthy. Clayton Kershaw pitching great. Emmett Sheehan seemingly, continuing to impress people. You joked about, hey, at the beginning of the year, there were jokes about they might be sellers more than buyers. With the rotation specifically, it seems as if there's no need to add a depth piece. There isn't available a number one starter that would necessarily move the needle. And so all the rumors have circulated around Dustin May and whether or not he might get moved. What are you sensing as the deadline approaches?
Yeah, I think Ken Rosenthal and I have each kind of reported over the course of the week. Like he's a guy that the Dodgers would listen on. Or I think that like if he's a guy that maybe can help you get an outfield bat that you want or something like that, like I think it would make sense to maybe use him in that way, just because this is a guy who is a free agent at the end of the year. You've already gotten probably more innings out of him than you would have expected, just considering his history and everything like that. Like they've already talked about, like, all right, we're at the Backend rest at some point for him, anyways. His stuff would probably play well in the bullpen, you would think. The results haven't been great as a starter. Like he's a guy who's probably going to be boxed out, or him or Emmett Sheehan, but Sheehan obviously is throwing the ball a lot better. is a guy who probably get boxed out once Blake Snell returns, and obviously we'll see whenever if Roki Sasaki returns, like what anything looks like. But like Dustin May is the kind of guy where like he would make sense in the bullpen. He is a guy who obviously probably wants to be a starter. I would imagine he wants to be a starter. I'm not speaking for him. Like that's just if you're looking at free agents,
assumption.
You're free agent at the year's end. Like you've already logged a career high in innings, and you kind of want to prove that you're still an really effective starter, like you were earlier in your career. So like this is something where like you can sort of try to leverage where things kind of stand in the starting pitching market. Obviously, the results haven't been great for Dustin May, but like the stuff has always been there. Even if the velocity is down a tick or two from where it was pre-surgery, like that, there's enough there to sort of think that you could see a team talking themselves into a deal there. And if the Dodgers are in a position where like, hey, he's going to help us access something else to improve the team, I think he's the piece that they'd be willing to at least listen on.
And so do you think there would be any sort of, I hate comparing everything to like the Michael Busch trade, but do you think there's a world where the Dodgers move a guy like May for pieces that are future pieces? Or do you think he only gets moved if it is either for a piece that helps them get a bat to help them this year or directly for a bat?
I'd be surprised if it was for future pieces. I wouldn't rule it out just because like it's not just the Michael Busch trade. Like they did this with Gavin Lux last year too. Like they've sort of seen like they have to be creative, especially when it comes to like when they're gonna be in luxury tax hell for years at this point. And like I think that like, they're perfectly fine with that. But like that means that there's gonna be penalties on the draft, on the international signings. So like you have to be creative in ways when it comes to restocking your farm system. So. I don't think they'd rule it out. I don't know what they would even get in like future sort of things for a rental who hasn't thrown the ball all that great. But like I think it'd be more for if he can help you kind of access something that helps right now. Like obviously, I would say that May is throwing the ball a lot better than Noah Syndergaard did a couple years ago. But like that sort of as the sort of like the deal that they probably would be willing to do that for. Like something where like they were able to get Ahmed Rosario in that deal. Like something where like he's a guy who can maybe fit. Someone who fits the roster a little bit better than Dustin May in a relief role or Dustin May as your fifth starter possibly could.
And you reference this, and not to beat the horse on Dustin May, but like, is there internal belief that as a reliever, he would have better results than he's had as a starter? Because I just keep looking at his stuff and saying, oh, of course he's going to figure it out as a starter, and he hasn't. And so I know it's a similar line of thinking with relief, but is there internal belief that as a reliever, he would be productive?
I don't know. I don't know if they even like let themselves get there at this point. I think they kind of understand that like, hey, like their bullpen will be boosted a little bit in October just by proxy of the fact that like you only need 4 starters in October. Yeah. So whoever's not in the rotation probably makes a lot of sense in a relief role. I'd imagine like even someone like Emmett Sheehan makes sense in that if he isn't in your rotation, postseason rotation, because that's kind of how they viewed him in 2023. Like he was obviously the only time he pitched in that series was more in a length role, but like he's the guy who also you'd think like, all right, the fastball maybe plays in a shorter burst. Dustin May, maybe you're thinking that maybe the fastball ticks back up to like 98, 99 in a shorter burst, or he can max out on his sweeper usage a little bit more just because he knows he only has to go through the lineup one more time, and that makes him more effective or whatever stuff. Because like the stuff is still pretty good when it comes to Dustin May, like, at least in terms of like the raw numbers. The actual like results haven't quite equated to that. And there's still work that whether it's as a starter or reliever that has to be done to kind of correct that. But like I'd imagine at least like in theory, it's something that kind of makes sense in your head.
Okay, let's talk bullpen because that's probably the space where they're going to be the most active. I want to start first with the guys who aren't currently available but are in the organization. Because part of this is doing the math on like who do we expect to come back and who do we expect to be available by the time the postseason starts. And that's not a short list, and it's not a list of no names either. So I'm curious for you. I'll mention 4 guys who are currently unavailable, and I'm curious from your perspective, which of these guys you think it's safe to say, nothing safe to say with Dodgers pitchers, but as safe to say as you could possibly, that they will be back and available and helpful. And the 4 I'm thinking of are Tanner Scott, Michael Kopech, Brusdar Graterol, and I'm going to throw a wild card in there, which is Kyle Hurt, because this is a guy who has immense potential if he can ever stay on the field and be available. So Scott, Kopech, Graterol, and Hurt. Are all 4 of those guys in your mind safe to assume they'll be available come postseason time?
I think they're all in play at the very least. Okay. I think that's the thing. Like in play, and obviously, like it's all kind of fluid. I think obviously they got the best case scenario when it comes to Tanner Scott news. Like We'll see how he feels when he picks up a ball and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's all stuff, especially when you're talking about like a forearm or an elbow. Like, you have to like tread very carefully with how optimistic you are. But I think they're reasonably optimistic. And obviously, we'll see who they add at the deadline. But I wonder if like they had someone who maybe like where you don't have to use Tanner Scott in the ninth inning necessarily, that sort of frees him up for specific matchups. And you saw it last October. I mean, that's when he was at his best, was when he like you knew that you could deploy him against a certain part of the lineup, and it's electric stuff. Like, even like this year, like the stuff hasn't been bad. It's just been put in bad spots, and hitters are ready for it. And obviously, hitters are gonna, if they're ready for it, like they're gonna be able to at least produce a lot better than you'd think. So like obviously having Tanner Scott in this bullpen, even with the struggles, kind of boosts everything else. Kopech, obviously we'll see like sort of how he feels once he's actually off a mound and stuff like that. But he was throwing really quickly after meniscus surgery, and basically said like he didn't think that he needed a 60-day IL stint. Obviously the Dodgers kind of needed to do it for logistical reasons.
Yeah.
But he said he thinks he could be ready before he's eligible, and he's eligible August 27th. So like he's a guy who obviously you have to get things dialed in, even when he was healthy for those 8 appearances. I know he didn't allow a run in those appearances, but the command's never his strong suit, but the command was not in a good place. Like there were some stretches where he didn't seem to know where he was going. So like that's obviously consideration. He's probably as motivated to pitch as anyone. He's a guy who's a free agent at year's end. Like he wants to sort of show like what he is, and obviously wants to be part of this. Gratterall, I think that's a guy who obviously it's crazy to say about a guy who's coming off shoulder surgery, but I think like this is a guy who even Brandon Gomes said the other day, like they probably have like the least concern that you can just sort of give him, as long as he can throw 98, 99 in a sim game. I think they'll feel confident throwing him in a postseason bullpen if they need to, just because they kind of understand like there's not a lot of nuance to what he's doing out there. It's fastballs, cutters, sliders. He's pounding the zone and he's bullying guys. So like as long as he can throw strikes with 99, like that's sort of what the Dodgers kind of hoping for there. Like I think with Kyle Hurt, like I don't think you can rule him out. I think he's the guy much more so than River Ryan. I wouldn't expect River Ryan to be part of the picture this year, but I think Kyle Hurt, he had the surgery earlier than River Ryan, but also was a guy who looked like he was destined for a relief role even before he got hurt. And he's a guy who is expected at least to be ramping up towards the end of the season. And like he's a guy who at least keep your eye on as a potential option. And obviously we'll see how he's feeling, how he's throwing the ball, and where everything else stands. But he's at least a guy who should be at least somewhat in the mix when you're sort of thinking about an October bullpen.
And then again, if the rotation's healthy, you could have Robleski, you could have Sheehan, and who knows with Roki Sasaki, those 3 guys as as just sort of ancillary pieces. But let's talk to the rumors, because that's the exciting stuff. I think a lot of fans are maybe getting their hopes up about a guy like Clase, Duran, or Griffin Jax. I read your colleague Ken Rosenthal's report. He says it's doubtful the Dodgers pay sticker price for that. Do you think I know the Dodgers would obviously love to go get a back-end guy. The problem with this year is, other than Ryan Helsley, who's the other name that's worth mentioning, all those other guys have like 3 to 4 years of team control remaining. And so the cost is going to be high. And so is the Dodgers best, are they seeking a back end of the bullpen guy, or is it just a matter of like, hey, we just need some depth reinforcements to get us over the finish line?
I think they're seeking a guy who could pitch late innings for them. I don't think they're necessarily needing to pay sticker price, sort of like you mentioned. Like some of the guys that you mentioned, like I don't even know if they get moved at all this deadline period. Like we'll see where the Guardians kind of stand. The Twins probably are going to sell, but like I think like this is just my speculation. I think I'm reporting, but like I'd imagine like Jax is more likely to move than like Duran, for example. Like for just all value and like who's willing to pay these prices and stuff like that. Helsley's a different case, like you mentioned, because he's free agent at year's end. I'm kind of monitoring like what the Rays kind of do, because obviously if they're in it, like they're probably more willing to keep a Pete Fairbanks, but like if they're not, then they're probably a team that's as willing as any to like sort of flip pieces around and try to get value wherever they can. But yeah, I think they're targeting something like that, but, or at least someone that they can envision like with a tweak or two can sort of be in that kind of role. I think that some of the guys that Ken kind of mentioned includes like a Ryan Brazier, who wasn't even a trade deadline acquisition at all, but was a guy who they signed midseason and kind of turned into a leverage reliever. Chris Martin's a guy who was obviously effective when the Dodgers traded for him from the Cubs, but it wasn't what he wound up being in the second half of the season. So like, I think they kind of are willing to kind of look at, like, they're always going to look on the margins. I think they're going to obviously be engaged in the big names. Like, obviously you're going to hear your rumors about like a Mason Miller or a Clase and stuff like that. Like, and yeah, like they're technically probably going to be true. Like Dodgers are probably going to be talking to the teams about those guys, but I would be a little surprised if a deal crosses the finish line there just because of the prices involved and obviously like who the Dodgers probably are willing and aren't willing to move in those kinds of deals.
So if you were to kind of look at the intersection of guys who are actually likely to be moved and guys that the Dodgers might be willing to pay the price on, it seems like Helsley is the name that sort of is most closely at where those two lines meet. Or do you think the price on him is going to be too high, given that he's a rental?
I think amongst like the biggest names that are being thrown out there, probably he's the one who makes more sense than like a Clase or Mason Miller or even like a Griffin Jacks. But like obviously, there's going to be names that we aren't thinking of that kind of pop in, or even a guy like a Brock Stewart kind of makes a lot of sense. Like you're looking at what he's done with Minnesota this year, and guys like that, like guys who I'm going to start listing off like former Dodgers, but like a Danny Kalum or like a Caleb Ferguson or Dennis Santana.
Santana
like,
was another name
like these kind of guys who are like guys with good stuff that the Dodgers have confidence that they can tweak one or two things and turn into a leverage reliever, even similar to like what they did with Anthony Banda last year, like where you find the right guy, kind of put him in a change of scenery or put him in their infrastructure, and they feel like with one or two tweaks, like he's a guy who all of a sudden becomes a really effective reliever. And that's not necessarily the sexiest deadline, but like I think reinforcing as much as they can with the depth, but also kind of like looking at the top end is it's obviously priority number one for the Dodgers this deadline.
Not to put you on the spot, but sort of to put you on the spot. So like if you had to make a prediction on August 1st, have the Dodgers added a guy who can close games for them?
Yeah, I would say so for sure. Like someone that at least like you could throw in the ninth inning and like like maybe not throw in the ninth inning on August 1st, but like throw in the ninth inning in September and October and feel like decently good about. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the offense. The big news that came out last night was from your colleague Katie Wu, who we had on our show when they traded for Tommy Edman last year, and she's awesome. The Dodgers have expressed interest in Brendan Donovan, left-handed hitter, second baseman, third baseman primarily, capable of playing the corner outfield. However, she also added that the price is sky high for Donovan because he's got a couple years of team control remaining, or I guess say two years of arbitration, I believe, less team control, same thing. That was not a name that was on my bingo card. So what have you been hearing from Katie and kind of from the Dodgers side on this one?
Yeah, Katie and I have both been kind of hearing that Donovan's a name that's at least come up. Like I don't think he gets moved, honestly. I'd be surprised. But like obviously, like the Dodgers' interest kind of shows something. Like obviously, they have a type when it comes to like Cardinals utility guys who've been really effective, and it worked out really well with Tommy Edman last year. But Donovan's a little bit different, and a little bit more club control than Edman did last year. Edman was kind of hurt, so like the value was kind of down. So the Dodgers were kind of pouncing when the time was right. Donovan's value has probably never been higher. He's coming off an All-Star appearance, but he does make sense in a way that the Dodgers would like to add a bat, probably an outfield bat, probably left-handed, but doesn't have to be left-handed. But just something because they haven't gotten production out of left field. You're looking at that with Michael Conforto, his struggles, and obviously he's been better in July, but hasn't turned it on in July. So Donovan's fit, obviously, like the price would be sky high, like you mentioned. That would make it difficult, especially when the Dodgers' priority is elsewhere. But it's at least something to keep in mind. And I'd imagine, like just talking to folks, like the fit would probably be if they did pull us off, would probably be Donovan at like second. You can move Edman to the outfield, center field. That puts Andy Pajes in the corner, and all of a sudden you're improving your outfield by improving your by locking down second base and freeing up Tommy Edman. But I do think that adding in the outfield is something the Dodgers are at least pursuing, talking about, just something to add some more depth to this position player group. Because obviously, like, it's a pretty deep group, but obviously it's not produced like they've expected the last couple months, especially when it comes to some of their stars. I think they're banking more on those guys turning around than any sort of bat shifting their fortunes. But I think you sort of saw this logic last winter, honestly, in signing Conforto in the first place. Like, if you have pitching concerns, the easiest way to paper over it is if your offense is putting up a ton of runs. And obviously the bullpen got a ton of love last year in October, and they deserve it. But one of the main reasons why they won the World Series last year is because they kept producing runs. Their offense was great throughout the postseason last year.
Do you think they're just looking for a short-term fix when it comes to the offense? Because when you look at some of the, in the outfield specifically, like other than Pages and Teoscar Hernandez, who's under contract, it's not like they have 4 more guys at AAA just banging down the door waiting to get their opportunity. So is it possible that they're actually looking for a Donovan type in the sense that they also have a little bit of team control beyond this year? Or do you think they're more concerned about the player and figure out the team control later?
I mean, I think it's something obviously that's always going to be a consideration, but I think that's something where if you want to keep the price down, you're probably looking at a rental. If you're willing to kind of add a little bit more, like for someone like Donovan, like that kind of changes things a little bit. So I think it depends on the guy. But obviously, yeah, like you said, you can sort of figure out sometimes club control later. There was a year and a half of club control when they traded for Tommy Edman, but they quickly addressed that by extending him like 2 weeks after at Thanksgiving. So there's quick ways to address that if you need to. But yeah, I think it's more about just finding someone who can sort of raise the floor of production there in left field.
Any other names in the outfield that you've heard or that you think makes sense for the Dodgers?
I wrote about it a little bit last night. I think someone like Harrison Bader honestly makes some sense. There, obviously, he's not left-handed like I mentioned, but he's a guy who at least has a bankable skill you can sort of think about when it comes to the outfield defense. He's a guy who's very capable of playing center field, and that kind of, like I mentioned again, bumps Andy Pages to a corner where like he has been better than I think I could have imagined. Most people could have imagined in center field, but he's a guy who the glove could really be dynamic in a corner. So that kind of overall improves your outfield defense if you have someone like Bader in there. Obviously, he's a rental, so the price will probably be down. But he's a guy who probably have an interesting market, I think, this year at the deadline because there aren't a lot of rental bats in the outfield that kind of make a lot of sense for teams.
Last question for you, and I know it's never easy to just get asked about like, hey, this other guy reported this thing, but I'm curious what you made of the Dalton Rushing Boston Red Sox report and if that kind of jives with anything that you've been hearing from the Dodgers.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to draw a lot of interest. Like he's a guy who's a top 100 prospect. I think sort of that's why I read it. Like he's going to draw interest. Everything I've been told, and like Ken Rosenthal reported in May, I've reported this past week. Like it's basically like they're going to be really reluctant to move him. Alex Freeland, I would kind of throw in that same bucket. Like they don't want to move those guys. Obviously, if the right package comes along, that sort of changes things. But like they kind of envision Rushing as a guy who they want to kind of caddy with Will Smith, help keep Will Smith fresh, but also kind of understand that like, hey, like this is an older position player group. Dalton Rushing has a chance to be a really productive everyday big leaguer who is in his 20s. Like that, there's an opportunity there, and obviously you're kind of looking at it right now. Like, all right, like how does this backup catcher fit and get everyday at bats? Things have a way of working themselves out. I think they'd rather keep talent in the door, especially if he's a guy who, at least how they see him right now, is a guy who they see growing behind the scenes while still playing once per series.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, Fabian, you're the best. Thanks again for hopping on with us from Boston. You can check out all his stuff over at The Athletic. If you're not reading it already, it's, as far as I'm concerned, the best coverage of the Dodgers that we're getting. There's lots of great beat reporters, LA Times, they'll plunk it. But I really like the stuff Fabian does. And of course, you get stuff like Katie Wu and Ken Rosenthal and all of the different pieces. So we appreciate the work, Fabian. I know you've got a busy week ahead of you, maybe a more busy week than you're hoping for, but it keeps things fun, right? To know that you've got a trade deadline coming up.
Deadline week's always interesting. I kind of like it. Obviously, I don't sleep a lot, but I like having the action. I like having stuff that matters kind of in the middle of the season. So
totally love it. Well, go ahead, check his stuff out at The Athletic. As always, we appreciate him coming on. Thanks to everyone for watching. Again, if you're new here, please subscribe, ring the notification bell. We're headed to 90,000 subscribers. We could use your help on that. You can check out DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 on social media. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. As always, go Dodgers.